You're listening to the Immortal Icons of Dance podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Johnson. In today's episode, we'll be learning about the legendary choreographer Agnes DeMille. The biographical information I'm about to share with you comes from the Kennedy Center website. Agnes de Mille was born in 1905 in New York City. When she was very young, her father moved the family to California to follow his brother, Cecil B. DeMille, to work in the new field of motion pictures. Always very dramatic, DeMille and her sister gave piano recitals and staged drama productions for their friends, but her parents refused to let her take dancing lessons. She did have the opportunity to see a dance performance, however, by Anna Pavlova. The performance inspired in young Agnes the desire to become a famous dancer. When DeMille's sister's arches fell in her feet, the doctor recommended that she take dancing lessons. Agnes convinced her parents to allow her to take dance lessons as well, although Agnes admits herself that she was not very talented at the time. Later, upon graduating from the University of California, Los Angeles, she moved to New York, where she struggled to make a living as a dancer. Her first real job came when she was hired as a dancer and choreographer in Christopher Morley's revival of a 19th century melodrama, The Black Crook. In 1932, DeMille moved to London, where she received extensive dance training at Madame Marie Rambert's Ballet Club. Here, she studied with fledgling choreographers including Frederick Ashton and Anthony Tudor, who would join her later in her efforts to revolutionize the ballet and dance worlds. Throughout the 1930s, DeMille would return from London back to the States to take odd jobs. She danced in her uncle's staging of Cleopatra in 1934, and she choreographed for the 1936 Romeo and Juliet film that starred Leslie Howard and Norma Shearer. Most of her time, however, was spent battling poverty in London while she tried to become an original choreographer. DeMille's career made a change for the better in the late 1930s and early 40s. In 1939, she was invited to join the American Ballet Theater's opening season. Here, she created her first ballet, Black Ritual, in 1940. In 1942, the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, a company that came to the United States because of World War II, invited DeMille to choreograph a ballet for their repertory. She created Rodeo, a highly energetic work with a uniquely American spirit that captured its opening night audience so much that it received 22 curtain calls. Also in 1942, DeMille choreographed her ballet Three Virgins and a Devil for the American Ballet Theater. The following year, she joined Rodgers and Hammerstein to create the triumphant Oklahoma, a musical that revolutionized the art form by integrating its choreographic numbers into the plot in a way that had never been done before. DeMille went on to choreograph some of the biggest Broadway hits in the 40s and 50s, such as One Touch of Venus in 1943, Carousel in 45, Brigadoon in 47, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes in 1949, and Paint Your Wagon in 1951. In 1952, she published the first volume of her autobiography, Dance to the Piper. She also made her way to the world of television when she narrated and directed 2 hour-long programs on dance for the Omnibus series. DeMille published the next volume of her autobiography, and Promenade Home, and choreographed the musical Goldilocks in 1958. During the 1960s, DeMille continued to produce many memorable ballets and published several more dance books. From 1973 to 74, the tireless DeMille founded and toured with the Agnes de Mille Heritage Dance Theater. In 1975, she suffered a debilitating stroke, but she fought her way back to health in time to receive the Handel Medallion, New York's highest award for achievement in the arts. In 1980, she was given the nationally prestigious Kennedy Center Honor Award by President Carter and the National Medal of Arts in 1985. DeMille continued to be very actively involved with artistic endeavors up until her death in 1993. Today, we'll speak with a dancer who got to work with Agnes towards the end of Agnes's life. Elizabeth Ferrell was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and began her training with Alexandra Zaharias. At age 14, she was awarded a Ford Foundation scholarship to study at the School of American Ballet, and upon graduation was chosen by Peter Martins to receive the Danish-American National Cultural Exchange Scholarship to study with the Royal Danish Ballet. In 1985, Elizabeth was invited by Mikhail Baryshnikov to become a member of American Ballet Theater, where she danced from 1985 to 1998. During that time, she appeared in much of the classical and contemporary repertory. She also performed with the Pennsylvania Ballet, Iglevsky Ballet, New York City Opera, Alessandra Ferri's Stars of the American Ballet, and most recently, Hong Kong Ballet. She can be seen in several Dance in America programs for PBS, Herbert Ross's movie Dancers, and Frederick Weissman's documentary Ballet. Elizabeth took part in the inaugural teacher training program of ABT's National Training Curriculum and is now an ABT certified instructor. She has taught at Ballet Hispanico, Perry Dance Center, Gibney Dance, and Steps on Broadway in New York. She's also taught at DanceWorks in London and the Hong Kong Academy of Performing Arts, and has guest taught in the US, London, and Hong Kong. Elizabeth currently teaches at the JKO School of American Ballet Theater, and today she's here to talk with us about her time dancing for Agnes de Mille. Today on the podcast, we are going to welcome Elizabeth Farrell here to talk with us. About Agnes de Mille, who she had the great opportunity to work with during her career as a dancer at ABT. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So how did you first become aware of Agnes? Was it through the stage or screen or in person?
I think the first time that I witnessed something, a piece done by Agnes, was not at ABT. They had not done a de Mille piece at ABT for 10 years when I first met her. But I had seen on Dance in America, the television, I guess the public television production of, they did a small bit of Rodeo, I believe it's 1977, with Christine Seri and Terry Orr and Marcos Paredes. And I saw that, and it was just the first two sections of Rodeo, I think they call it the Buckaroo Holiday, the beginning, and then it's Twilight. So it ended kind of on a sad note. I was a little bit, didn't see the whole story, so I wasn't really sure I understood it, but you could see that Christine Seri was just a genius of acting and dancing, and it seemed like a really fun ballet. So I saw Rodeo first. And then I think I was aware that she had done a lot of musical theater, Oklahoma, Brigadoon. I had heard of those, knew that she was involved in that, but that's pretty much all I knew about Agnes in the beginning before I met her.
Was there any impression or just sort of an awareness?
It was an awareness. It wasn't on my radar for something I wanted to dance. I had been at SAB, so I learned the balancing style, and I was kind of starry-eyed about all the balancing ballets. I didn't really see myself as that kind of dancer. So, like I said, it wasn't on my radar, but I enjoyed watching it, and of course the music, amazing. Copland's score, so moving and so beautiful, and love the music to Oklahoma, Brigadoon. I love musicals, so enjoy that. But it wasn't something I imagined myself dancing. So
then you were in American Ballet Theater for, I believe, 13 years.
Yes,
in the Corps de Ballet.
Yeah, 1985 to 1998.
And in your third year, you had the opportunity to work with Agnes. How did that come about?
I think Baryshnikov, who was the director at the time, Mikhail Baryshnikov, had really been wanting to bring some of the de Mille works back. So that third year, they started putting up rehearsals on the schedule. Just said it said de Mille, and it was a long list of names, so we knew it was going to be like an audition. Had no clue what it was about, what ballet it was going to be, and basically it was an audition. We were brought in, and she told us she was going to be creating a ballet called The Informer with an Irish theme. And it was dances from music that she had used in a musical called Juno, which had an Irish theme. I think was more of a comedy, but this ballet, she told us, was going to be a drama. It was going to be dramatic, and we had to learn Irish step dancing for the ballet.
Do you know how old she was at this point when you were working with her?
At this point, she was probably late 70s. Boy, I don't want to say for sure. Okay. She was
what year
definitely,
was it?
She was elderly, and she was, at this point, it was after her stroke. So she was in a wheelchair, they would wheel her in at the beginning of the rehearsal and wheel her out. She didn't stand, so at this point in her when she was choreographing, it was from her chair. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and so we came in, and it was a little scary. And we were told, don't even put your pointe shoes on. It's going to be just wear your flat shoes now. And eventually you'll be getting, whoever's called to it later it'll be in gillies. They're called. They're almost like ballet slippers, but they have a harder sole, and they lace up the leg. It's similar to what you would see like Highland dance. Scottish dance as well. So it was the kind of Irish step dancing that was done in softer shoes, not the tap shoes. Mm-hmm. So we learned some of those steps, and then we had to do a couple of scenes from a section she called keening, which I didn't know what that meant, but it turns out keening means grieving. Mm-hmm. And there was a scene where after one of the main characters is killed, the women all go to a room somewhere and they just let it all out. They scream and cry and go through this tragic experience together. And it was a way of getting out the emotions and in a sort of community setting. But it was that, I think that's where it really started getting like, oh my goodness, this is a bit different. Mm-hmm. And we had to do this section where you would like feel it from the floor and it would come up your body, and then you would just let out a scream, and you had to open your mouth and fake scream. And for some people it was really embarrassing. And I decided in myself that I was going to go for it. I was going to try not to feel embarrassed or shy or inhibited. And I went for it. And I guess I did okay, because the next day they had the list of about, I think it might have been about 10 ladies. And my name was on the list. So I was like, oh, well, I guess I did okay. Mm-hmm. And from that group that she initially picked from, we were used over and over in her ballets. So we were called the DeMille group. And so we started off in The Informer. Then when Rodeo came up, you saw the same similar names called. And I think she felt comfortable working with us. And we also got into a groove with her. So a lot of the names, like, I was one of them, and Rosalie O'Connor, she was called Marie France, who Agnes liked to call La France. She would never say her name correctly. She'd be like, La France, come here. But there was sort of the same group of people, women and men. So we started working on The Informer at that point. Yeah.
Was your first impression during the audition, did it hold up? Was it the same as how she was in rehearsal later on, or was it more intense in the beginning and then softer?
I think we were all kind of scared of her a little bit. She was, she could be a little bit, she didn't mince words, as they say. She would tell you if that looked terrible, and she didn't have a problem saying it quite directly, Beth, that was wrong, or that was bad, and you just had to sort of take it and know it's coming from a place where, like it just, like you couldn't take it personally. It was, and sometimes it was delivered in a funny kind of manner. So, you know, it would be secretly funny. And in fact, you know, I would say a lot of us went on, you know, she would say some pretty amazing things to people, and we would, you know, relive it later at, you know, at the bar,
Yeah.
at BAR, not two R's and an E.
Right.
Like later would like laugh about what Agnes had said to us that week. But you had to have a pretty thick skin. So, you know, which at that point I really didn't. It was kind of a learning experience for me to get used to just, you know, like taking corrections in a way that wasn't always delivered with like, is it okay? You know, it was just said like, no, that's wrong. That's not what I'm looking for. I wish she would say a lot. I wish I could get up and show you myself, you know, and you could see sometimes her frustration with not being able to sort of stand up and do it herself. And I have to point out at this point also, when she was working with us, she would have one or two assistants who had worked in advance of our rehearsals on movements and sections of the ballet. So she always came in with her homework kind of done, and she would want to see it on our bodies and how we interpreted it. But she would come in with like Diana, who I mentioned, Diana Gonzalez, and for the Informer, Dirk Lombard came in and assisted with that. So she would have, and when we did Rodeo, Christine Seri came in. So there were people who had worked out movement with her in advance. And then if we weren't getting it, they could stand up and help us out, you know, with what she was trying to get at. Because sometimes it was a little intimidating. You would see that she wanted something done a certain way, and we couldn't always get it. We couldn't always sort of visualize what she was trying to say. And thus the frustration on her end, you know, with us. And some of us were very young at that point, 3 years in the company. I was probably 21. So,
Wow.
you know, it was definitely, you know, a little bit scary at first. But then we all got in a groove with her, and it was a lot of good times in the studio.
You started to mention some. What are some other really common phrases that you'd hear Agnes use in the studio?
She had a few. She would love to tell you about stuff that happened in the past, and she would always end it with, and that's a fact. So it'd be like, you know, Nora Kay could do 64 fortes on a dime and finish with a quadruple, and that's a fact. You know, so that was one of her big. She had these. She would like to talk a lot about like the dancers or herself in the past, and how now that, you know, like she would say, now you're also strong and so clean and technical. But, you know, back then when we were dancing, you know, we might have been rough, but, you know, we could do 64 fortes on a time, or I could balance forever, you know. But I think sometimes she would get super frustrated with the men, because typical men fashion, it's hard for them, especially if you get a room full of core gentlemen, to stand still and wait for her to choreograph on them. They would be getting fidgety, start doing pirouettes in the back, and double tours and things like that. And she loved the men. Like she had a real like glimmer in her eye when she would talk to them, but she would get so like frustrated with their energy sometimes. And when it got out of hand, she had a big, huge wedding ring, an enormous wedding ring. And she would smack her hand like on the mirror, bam, 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 with the wedding ring. And of course, everybody would stop, and she would be like, stop that turning. They were very good, I might add. So she had like, she couldn't help herself. She really loved the gentlemen. Yeah. She would shamelessly flirt with usually the leads in her ballet. And they were always very gallant with her. So it was kind of fun to watch. She just lit up around gentlemen, I have to say. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite memory being in rehearsal or on stage or even after performance?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many moments in DeMille ballets where it doesn't happen often in other ballets where you, I mean, standing on the side in the corps, yes, you're standing still, but like there's a lot of moments where you're processing your thoughts in a de Mille ballet, and the music's just washing over you. And there's a moment in Rodeo, and I love this moment so much. I get teary-eyed on stage every time when I don't, you know, the story of it is, you know, the cowgirl who's, you know, eternally optimistic and completely in love with, I get teary-eyed right now just thinking about it, but she's in love with this, one of the cowboys on the ranch, the head wrangler, and he just views her as a little sister, a pesky little sister. She's cute, she's fun, but he's not interested. And she gets her heart broken over and over again, and she keeps trying. And then finally, like, it's the third or fourth section of the ballet. Well, no, it's quite near where she changes into the dress. So I think it's like fourth or fifth, actually. And she's been rejected so many times, you know, and she just stands up and she starts dreaming, you know, like you're facing the audience, and that Copland music, the waltz, that beautiful waltz music by Copland, and you're just standing there while about 4 corps couples are doing a little waltz together. The evening has started, and she's just dreaming of like waltzing with this man she's in love with, and she's dreaming. And then she eventually tries a little waltz herself across the front of the stage. And then her best friend, who she has no idea, that's always been on her side, and in the end, she ends up falling in love with her best friend. He you know, pulls her in, and he does a whole section where he's like, come on, snap out of it, you know, stop wallowing in your misery, you know, buck up. Mm-hmm. And it's a whole beautiful little section. And I think if I could relive anything on stage, I would do that little section. It's just so beautiful and so fun. And so, I mean, it sounds funny to say honest, but it felt very truthful emotionally to me. So that's probably my favorite moment on stage in a de Mille piece. And then I think I have good memories of rehearsals. Rehearsals were always really, you know, once we learned the ballet, we always did all the acting full out in rehearsals. So sometimes you'd have almost a better show in the studio than you would on stage. Like it would feel so like people were so into it, you know, and you'd have like Victor Barbie and the Informer, like panting and like, oh, you know, like in the most dramatic scenes, and everybody was just going so full out. It was really pretty special. And there was one time she wanted us, it was a section of the Informer where it's got an Irish theme. It's like the early 1900s, where it's under that part of Ireland's under British rule. There's a lot of rebellion going on. It's kind of, you know, not so outright, but the young people are feeling a lot of animosity toward the British rule. And there was a section where we're all dancing and together, men and women, and it's, you know, a typical Agnes. There's a lot of flirting going on, a lot of showing off, and it goes into another place where it starts getting like very dramatic, and people getting like feeling a bit more. They're feeling less inhibitions, and they're starting to be like, you know, like long live Ireland, you know, like to the Irish, you know. And so we start rebelling in the streets. And then one section I had to pull out a scarf, and a green scarf. So when you pull it out of your brown dress, it's very visible. And I had to wave it. And then I run up to Victor Barbie's character, who's the title character, the Informer, and had to put it around his neck, like, come and join us. And he ends up informing on the other lead man because he's jealous. I mean, it's quite a complicated story, but he was jealous of the other man getting the beautiful girl, the beautiful lead woman, and he informs on him, and this other young man is shot by the British. But you can tell, like, from the beginning, he's just not a part of the community. He's a little bit separate and kind of always observing. And this part, I put it around his neck and I try to get him to join me, like, with the group. And he pulls it off so hard. And in the rehearsal, he pulled it off really hard and I stumbled and she wanted to keep it in. She wanted me to go all the way down to the floor. So he had to pull it off and throw me on the floor. And she goes, "Beth can do it. She's an actress," like that. And I felt so proud. But then I had to deal with like half the guys in the company being like, "Beth will do it. She's an actress." Call Beth. She'll do it. So I got a little teasing after that, but I, secretly was pretty excited. Mm-hmm. So that was a great moment too. Like, working on The Informer was really, because it's the first thing we worked on with her. Yeah. So it was really special. Yeah.
If you like the work that is being done here at Immortal Icons of Dance, there are many ways you can support. Most simply, you can follow us on Instagram at Immortal Icons of Dance. It would also be great if you could rate the podcast on whatever platform you listen. 5 stars are always appreciated. Now, I have to ask, I'm not as familiar with Agnes's work as I am with Balanchine and Robbins. Mm-hmm. Now, Robbins was very into character work, right? And Balanchine was just do the steps, and the steps will tell you everything you need to know. So where does Agnes fall in that? How did she?
I think, well, you always had to have the story in mind. I don't think she didn't like overacting. You had to really tread a very fine line, which could be challenging sometimes because a lot of the emotions were much more on the surface and shown than, like, say, in a Anthony Tudor ballet, which was more like this inner turmoil that you're showing more through your dancing, and so it was more outright acting. But she was very particular with it. A couple of times, there was one Rodeo performance where she told me to go back a little, like, it was a little bit too, rein it in, because I was a little too excited. It was my first performance at the Met. I had done the lead at Kennedy Center, and it was kind of a little bit of a triumph for me. I had a fantastic review in the Washington Post, and I was feeling on cloud 9. And super excited to do it in New York City at the Met. And I think I came out of the starting gate, just too much energy, too happy, too excited in the opening section. And she's like, "It was scary. You have to, your energy was too much. It was too, then it took me a performance or two to sort of get over. Then I was afraid to be acting too much, so I really reined it too far back, maybe. So it was finding that right sort of where it's honest and not over the top. And she was changing her mind a lot about how she liked it done. Not so much Rodeo. I think that was a really personal ballet for her because she had done the lead. She choreographed it, and did the first show on her and Sir Frederick Franklin. So I think it's really almost autobiographical. How do you say that?
Autobiographical.
Autobiographical. It's very much her personality, that kind of just.
So that's really special for you to get to step into that role of her telling her own story.
And she was really, like I said, she was very particular about it. There were. One thing I thought I did well in that there was sections that you could feel really sorry for yourself and you could let it go down sort of this sad sack, and I think she didn't want it to go there typically. She didn't want it to be too pathetic, there's a sort of always sort of a little bit of an optimistic side of the cowgirl. And that part I felt good about. I could be sort of, on the right track with that. It was always the comedy where I would get overboard, so like doing the comedy is hard. It's hard because you want to like make it read from the audience, and especially when you're on a stage like the Metropolitan Opera House where things get lost so easily. So you'd want it to be a little bit broader, but not too broad. So it's, awkward to look at or not realistic. So that was challenging. And I know like later on when we worked on the ballet Three Virgins and a Devil, that was always like, because it's very much a comedy, getting the right feeling for it was always like, it was, it took a little fine tuning. And she was really good with like telling you when it worked and when it didn't. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So that was always, that was a big challenge, is just getting like the acting the way she wanted it, which was, I think, from an honest place, Yeah. So, but she'd like it, sometimes she would like it bigger. I remember, this was the very last rehearsal she did, actually. It was the summer, right before she died. She died in, I believe, October. And I'm not sure of the date right now. I want to say maybe 83 or 84, 1984, maybe 1983. I can't remember. But that summer, my friend Diana Gonzalez, who was her assistant, we did a production of Brigadoon with a smaller theater, North Shore Music Theater, which is in Massachusetts, and then Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, Casa Mañana. So we did this production of Brigadoon, and it was the first time Diana was setting it herself. So she wanted Agnes to work with us. So they brought Agnes in to NYU. We were at NYU. And I had been taught the way, I guess, some of the other productions of it, she wanted, there was a beautiful dance that the character Maggie Anderson, which was what I was playing at that performance, called The Funeral Dance. And it's to bagpipe music, and it's just there's no singing. It's just like one of the lead characters has died, and it's a sort of a dance of mourning. And the bagpipes start blaring, and it's this very sort of chilling dance that this character does. And it's done barefoot and very earthy and very ritualistic. So I was taught to be, when I was taught it by Diana, I was taught it the way they had done it the last time, which is, you were supposed to be very stoic, very blank. And it was just this, like the movement was the anger and the passion and the grief. And I did it that way. And well, for one thing, Agnes was in kind of a mood that day. She was not being her nicest. So my friend Diana had done her dance, the character Jean McLaren, Bonnie Jean. She had done this beautiful dance, Come to Me, Bend to Me, and Agnes was picking it apart. So I was standing there like, oh no, she's going to be really hard. And she told my friend, she said, like, you've got to close your mouth when you're dancing. You look like a trout, like that. And Diane was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. So we were like, I feel like she was like, sort of like had a lot of, frustration in this rehearsal. And then I did the dance and she was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I didn't know what to say. It was like, this is what I was told to do. This is what, and she's like, your lover has just died. Would you dance like that? And I was like, no. She's like, you've got to do more. It's it's a scream of grief. And I was like, wow, well, that's very different than what, I was thinking that this dance was. So I tried it again and I tried to like sort of go more for it. And It was better, but she was still kind of not pleased with it. And she kept saying, you wouldn't do it like that. Your lover has died. This is, it's tragic. It's beyond, and rehearsal was over. I almost started crying in the rehearsal. Like, it was really frustrating. I was sweating. Like, I just remember being drenched in sweat, and she left, and I was like, oh God, that was hard. And then my friend wheeled her home. She came back with a candy bar, and she said, Agnes felt bad.
Oh.
She said to cheer up, but to do more. And so I had she gave me a candy bar, which was like, I saved it and saved it and saved it. And then we did one move and I left it in the freezer.
Oh.
So it might still be in the refrigerator on 23 West 83rd Street, our apartment many years ago. But anyway, that was her last rehearsal. And I was often wondering, like, if maybe she was just feeling differently about death at that point, feeling maybe more a different outlook on it. I mean, she would often change her mind about how she wanted something done, and she would also, I think, and maybe it also didn't work with me, like she would sort of tailor some things to what your strengths were. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, but it was definitely, that was my last rehearsal with her. It was quite memorable in many ways, but like I said, it was a tough one. So yeah. And then we found out in October that she passed away. So.
As always, I highly encourage you to check out our YouTube channel. There's a video version of every episode if you're more of a visual learner. But beyond that, I've created a playlist of videos that are relevant to each episode. More than anything, I want this podcast to be a gateway or a launching point so that you can begin to investigate a piece of dance history that you haven't engaged with before. My interviews could never capture the entirety of someone's experience with these great icons of dance. But the conversations we have here can lead to you discovering more. The playlists include old interviews with the dance icon, vintage footage of them dancing, and I also include links to books that they've written. I try to provide as many avenues as possible so that you can continue your own learning experience. What do you think is the biggest impact that she left on the dance or the theater world? What do you think is, whether it's the most important piece that she created or philosophy? I don't know.
Yeah, I think she would say, like, there's a really wonderful television biography of her on PBS. The Indomitable Agnes DeMille, I think it's called. And at one point she says, like, if there was a time that you could say when your life changed, she says that time was the opening night of Rodeo, that her life went from, like, she was now she became a choreographer that night, like, and that's when her luck changed, when it made it possible for her to continue doing what she wanted to do. So I think Rodeo probably was her moment. And also it preceded Oklahoma, which changed, of course, how musical theater ballets were presented. Before, I think Oklahoma, from what I heard, like, the dance numbers were like a set dance number. It didn't really move the story along. It was like a fun number, and then it would go on and continue with the story. Mm-hmm. And what she brought to, like, that musical theater ballet was it continued the story through the dancing. So that was a big change. And also she used what she would call the vernacular, like the way that we speak. Like, she would say, I love in the that's one of the television shows she did. She's like, I love swans. I'd love to choreograph swans, but it's not me. It's not what I do. You know, I do what is like for me, what I can do, you know? So, I think that she brought maybe, and it was starting to happen like with Robbins and Tudor, and that a different kind of sort of theatrical dance that, I mean, you needed ballet technique for it, but it was sort of secondary to the story. Like the steps weren't hard in general. Like you could be exhausted doing them because they, you know, like you needed stamina, but there was no steps that you couldn't handle doing. There were some challenging ones technically, and I know a Fall River Legend had a few pirouettes to the knee and things like that that could be pretty hard to do, but it was more about telling a story, and I think that was her genius, you know, telling a story. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you teach quite a bit now. Mm-hmm. You teach in New York and all over the country, and sometimes all over the world, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we used to live in Hong Kong and London, so I've taught in those places. But I mean, I mainly teach in New York, and then have been around a bit, you know.
So when you're in the studio, are there any pieces of Agnes that you impart to your students?
Yes, actually, there is. One thing I learned really quickly, and I think I mentioned it earlier, is if you go for something emotionally, it's a lot less embarrassing for you. I think people, like in a studio, it's hard for young dancers to express themselves sometimes. And I'm talking just looking up off the floor. You know, and it takes a lot of bravery to like present yourself, especially when you're at awkward age. So I'm constantly telling my students, my young students, that the more comfortable they feel with presenting themselves, the more comfortable we feel watching you. Mm-hmm. Like if you're inhibited or feeling self-conscious, yeah, it makes the viewer feel self-conscious too. And I always felt like watching in rehearsal when I would watch these incredible dance actors like Victor Barbie or Alessandra Ferri or, you know, Julio Boca, Angel Correa, like you would see them putting themselves out there with not being shy about it and not being like, it's not secondary, it's part of the presentation. So I think Agnes sort of helped me with that. And it's something that she encouraged all of us to do is make that a part of like the I mean, even if you're doing an abstract ballet or, you know, swan, there's still a kind of presentation that you have with your whole body, and it's not just the legs and feet. So I try to bring that to my dancers now, like that. And I think by the end of the year, I usually can get most people on board with, you know, and it's hard as a teenager. It's, you know, they feel self-conscious just out in the real world.
Yeah.
So it's but it's really important to remember because it's a performing art. So it's your whole body's performing. Mm-hmm. So, and it doesn't stop here. It goes all the way up to the top of your head. So that's, I think, probably one of the things that I took from working with Agnes, because it wasn't on my radar. I mean, I always like to smile on stage, and I guess I had a face that carried, you know, across the footlights. Yeah. So, which is important, you know, but, she sort of brought it out of all of us, you know, that worked with her. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
If someone is not familiar with Agnes's work and they've never seen anything, what would you recommend that they watch first? Not sure if you're familiar with anything that's on YouTube that's accessible or any of the.
I mean, I sadly, like her most famous piece is very hard to find on YouTube. The only thing that I've seen where you can, it's that Dance in America, 1977. It's very grainy. They need to, like, it would be great if they would reissue, remaster it. But and it's just a wonderful performance by Christine Seri, and Terry Orr is amazing. Marco Paredes is amazing. And it's a special time at ABT. It was really a wonderful era. I mean, that whole evening of works, I think they do a little bit of Pillar of Fire. I think I'm not totally sure, but I know they do a bit of Etudes, and they do Black Swan Pas de Deux with Cynthia Gregory. It's like a fantastic, I mean, that's what we were watching on TV back when I was growing up. So, of course, we're so starry-eyed about ABT and City Ballet, all these beautiful Dance in America productions. So that's on YouTube. You can see a very grainy version of Rodeo, the first two movements, Buckaroo Holiday and Twilight. There is a much clearer version of Fall River Legend that was also on. That's her ballet about Lizzie Borden. And it's really a wonderful ballet. I think that's probably her best known piece, ballet piece after Rodeo. So that's done by Dance Theater of Harlem with Virginia Johnson as Lizzie, and it's wonderful. There's also a very grainy on YouTube of Sally Wilson, who was a principal with ABT, probably one of the most famous dance actresses at ABT in the 70s and early 80s. She danced. And she's who taught us Three Virgins and a Devil before Agnes came in. So that's, if you can see anything with Sally Wilson, it's amazing. So Fall River Legend is wonderful. There's that PBS special on her, which is incredible. That's her whole life, and that's really wonderful. And there's, because I looked it up today, there is a Dick Cavett interview with her if you want to just hear her talk and get a feeling for her personality. All right. And it's hysterical. She just is, she's got such a way with words. It's amazing. So to hear her talk is really, it's entertaining. She's just such a, she was such a character. She just had such a way with words. And at one point, I think she said, I had one good foot. And she's, at this point, she's like, she's probably in her 70s or something. And she lifts her leg and points her foot. And Dick Cavett was like, that's a good foot. So it's a really fun and interesting interview. And I think it preceded her Kennedy Center honors because she got a Kennedy Center honor. So those are some good ones. I think there's some beautiful footage of Oklahoma. There's a fantastic, you can find on YouTube, Carousel with the original Louise Bambi Lynn. If you want to see someone flying, she does a circle of grand jetés and she is like 6 feet in the air. It's amazing. And they have the whole ballet from Carousel. So it's really very interesting to see. So you might get a feeling for her. A taste of them. Yeah. Well, for the listeners who are interested, there's going to be a link in the show notes to all of the videos that we've just talked about. So you can go do your homework too.
I can hardly believe that the holiday season is already upon us, and Immortal Icons of Dance has gifts for lovers of dance and dance history. To see our selection, head to shop.immortaliconsofdance.com. There, you'll find illustrations of some of our favorite dancers on shirts and sweatshirts and Christmas ornaments. There's also a collection of rare and vintage dance books and ballet programs. The one item that I'm most proud of is the wooden ornament celebrating the upcoming 90th anniversary of Balanchine's Serenade. It was designed, painted, and assembled by my hands in my uncle's garage this summer. There were only 50 made, so it's a very limited edition. Hopefully you can snag yours before we're sold out. To get ahead on your Christmas shopping, head to shop.immortaliconsofdance.com.
So I'm a big book collector. I collect a lot of vintage dance and ballet books.
Me
and
too.
I know that Agnes wrote quite a few.
Yes.
I think I have maybe 5 or 6 of her books in my collection.
I have some over there. If you see, like on that one shelf, I have several.
So I want to know, which ones have you read? Which would you recommend to read first?
Yeah. Well, the one over there, it's in the pink. It's a softback, paperback, and that has Dance to the Piper and Promenade Home. That's my favorite.
Okay.
That's a fantastic read. It talks about her early life, her early career as a choreographer. It talks about Rodeo, doing Oklahoma, what it's like to be on the road with the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo. I mean, it's just a really wonderful read, and she's such just an awesome narrator. It's just so fun to hear her voice through her words. She wrote a biography of Martha Graham. That's very personal because Martha was a mentor of hers, a mentor and a colleague, and sometimes a competitor. Yeah. There's a lot of feelings in that book, but it's beautifully written. I mean, they're all quick reads. She's wonderful. So I've read that one. I've read the one after her stroke. It's called Reprieve, and it's about her having her stroke and the comeback from that, because it was a completely debilitating stroke. She was paralyzed on her left side. She could stand with help and she could move her hands. But yeah, she was, like I said, when we worked with her, she was in a wheelchair. So that's a very interesting book about that time of her life. But yes, I mean, they're all worth reading, I think. Yeah.
Well, just needing a place to start. I've been overwhelmed by how many she wrote.
I think like Dance with the Piper and Promenade Home, those two are like,
I'll start there.
Yeah, those, you got to start with those.
Okay. So you've dedicated quite a bit of time to keeping her legacy alive. Your Instagram handle is @DeMille Dancer.
DeMille Dancer, yes.
So the last thing I want to ask, is there anything else that you want to immortalize, that you want to have people remember about her?
Yeah, I think there's right now, it's still amazing to me that it's so challenging. Like I think working so hard to find female choreographers these days, and it was being done back in the 40s. It's. I think we have to remember that like these women, like her and Martha, they were blazing those trails, and Doris Humphrey and all those women back choreographing in those days, in spite of being talked down to, and like she wasn't compensated always the way she should, but she was fighting for that. So I feel like it's something that should be honored now. I'd love to see them reviving some of her works, and it's been a little while since they've done Rodeo, so I'd love to see that again. But there's not just to stop there. There's some really wonderful works from the past that would be wonderful to bring back. And she was blazing that trail back then in the 1940s. I think at one point, like, she not only choreographed, but she directed a Broadway show as well. Allegro, she directed, choreographed, she was designing, like working on the costumes, and, like she had autonomy over some of her works. And that's pretty amazing, and that we're still fighting to get females work. It just seems unbelievable at this point when, they were doing it back then. So it should be an inspiration, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and her work is of its era, but it also touches on feelings that we all have. So I think it is in its way timeless. I know that they just did a production of Rodeo at Ballet West, and it was really well received. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this new production with the Martha Graham Company, where they are using they're setting the Copland score with bluegrass instruments. And I think that'll be a really interesting take on.
Yeah, that will.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to see that.
The work is still alive.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's still evolving.
Good.
Yeah. All right. Well, Beth, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Next week, we'll be back with a conversation with Dilise Croman talking about her mentor and ranking. See you then. The Immortal Icons of Dance podcast is written, produced, and edited by me, Lauren Johnson. Our music is written by Shelby Rassler of Jenkins and Rassler.